In this video, we're going to take a quick look at inspecting suspension and steering systems. So this CRV here has got a loose component, and we're going to talk about some of the checks that we can do while on a rack like this to look for loose or damaged suspension components. One of the first checks I'm going to do is just a shakedown of the wheel. And so I'm going to do that in two different positions and two different directions. So I'm going to start with my hands at 3 and 9 o'clock like this and look for movement. You can hear a really loud clunk on this, so I know that I need to figure out where that's coming from. The other position I want to check is at 12 and 6 and look for any kind of looseness there. That appears to be tight. Those two things are going to check different components. Generally, the 12 and 6 position are going to check my upper and my lower ball joints, whereas the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock are going to check my steering components. So because I had travel at the left and right sides, or the 3 and 9 o'clock positions, I'm going to focus on my steering linkage, repeat that test, and take a closer look. Here I can see that the whole inner tie rod assembly is moving and has that free play in it, and that tells me that that inner tie rod joint is likely bad and causing this issue. If I saw this holding fairly steady while having free play, then I'd want to look at my outer tie rod here at the end to make sure that it didn't have excessive free play. One of the other important steps in suspension diagnosis is a road test. We need to do a road test in a consistent way that allows us to put the suspension through different types of operations, see bumps, see loads, see different speeds. And so developing kind of a road test plan that works with the area that you're in is important for a technician. A great first step before my road test is to do what's called a dry park test. That's where I'm going to start with the vehicle off, just sitting still, and I'm going to take the steering wheel and rock it back and forth. We can hear when I do this that there's quite a clunk. I've got a GoPro on the fender looking at the right front wheel's travel, and I can see that there's somewhat of a lack of travel, and I can hear that noise from the tie rod. And so that's a quick first step to know that, hey, I've got something loose. With it running and at low speed, do a similar wheel shake, and again I can feel a looseness there, and that's going to tell me that it's probably in the steering linkage. On this road test, we noticed that the CRV has a bit of a wheel bearing noise, and so let's talk about what that sounds like. Wheel bearing failures come in a variety of ways. Early on, they generally create somewhat of a growling type noise that usually changes with speed, and as they get to be pretty worn or have a more severe failure, there could be free play in the wheel assembly as well. So this one, it appears to have a wheel bearing noise from the rear of the car, and so we're going to try to set the camera up and hear that on audio, and then talk about what do we do with our road test procedure in order to hear that. All right, so we're in the CRV. I've changed the cameras and some of the microphones set up. We're going to try to capture this rear wheel bearing noise that we're getting. And so one of the things that we're going to do is drive as straight as we can to speed to hear that noise, and then add steering input to try to load and unload the left and right sides to determine where this noise is coming from. So there I can hear the growl. And when I weave to the right, the noise goes away. So when we get to speed with the bearing and I weaved to the left, we notice that the noise got louder. When I weaved to the right, the noise got quieter. And so that tells me that I've got an issue in the right rear of this vehicle, because when I go to the left, I'm putting additional weight and load on that component, and the noise increased. Weight's always going to increase a bearing noise, and if I can make that corner lighter, the noise will generally get quieter. This CRV turned out to be a great candidate to show us some of the utility in inspection of suspension and steering components, as well as a road test. The road test is really a critical piece so that we can learn where the troubled areas are before we get to our rack and before we lift the car for inspection. On this CRV, we learned that the right front inner tie rod has substantial free play in it, and so I know that that's going to need replaced. It's a safety concern. The other thing that we realize is that the right rear wheel bearing is in trouble. It's making a growling noise. It's going to need to be replaced as well. Expanding your knowledge and your practice on road testing is just as critical as any other procedure in the shop. The faster that we can identify these troubled areas dynamically, just like the way that the customer experiences them, the more effective that we're going to be.